Good day, everyone, and welcome to our ProTraining technical webinar featuring Tommy Powell from MGK. Before we start, I'd like to review a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. Here's a quick review of what you will see on your screen. To the left of your screen is the viewer, where you can see the presentation. To the right is the control panel, where you can ask questions. The control panel will collapse automatically when not in use. To keep it open, click the View menu and uncheck Auto Hide Control Panel. You have joined this webinar in listen-only mode, which means you are muted. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions by typing them into the questions pane of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation, and we will address them during the Q&A session at the end. Also via the control panel, you can download resource documents our presenter provided by going to the handouts pane anytime during the webinar. Later today, you will receive a follow-up email containing the webinar recording. With that, let me introduce you to today's speaker. Tommy joined MGK Insect Control Solutions as a technical field specialist back in 2016. He received his BS and MS degrees in urban entomology from the University of Florida. Before working at MGK, Tommy worked 16 years in the pest management industry. He worked as a technical director for 3 top 100 pest control companies. He also held the position of branch manager for one of those companies for 5 years. That experience in operations changed his perspective on the pest management industry, as he realized the value of strong training programs for operators. His current role at MGK allows him to pursue this passion for teaching and training in pest control. With that, Tommy, you've got the floor.
Hi, guys. So thank you very much for inviting me. Today we're going to talk about stinging insects, mainly wasps, bees, and wasps. So we're going to cover that, and I'm going to go off camera. And I'm having a little bit of difficulty. Oh, there we go. There we go. Did my slide advance?
Yes, it did. I see your agenda right now.
There you go. All right, perfect. I've actually been like 3 slides in a presentation, and all of a sudden somebody was like, I'm still looking at the title slide. So we're going to talk a little bit about background, a little bit why bees and wasps, why stinging insects in general, a little bit about what makes them, where the stinger comes from, biology and treatment of bees, and then this is kind of how it's going to flow: biology, behavior, treatment of wasps. So when you're talking about treating insects like bees and wasps, biology is important. It's all about safety, especially since these insects sting. And then we're going to wrap up with some general safety tips and a new product from MGK, Onslaught Power Shot. So when we talk about these particular insects, bees and wasps, most people call them stinging insects because they have a stinger, and it evolved from an ovipositor. So what is an ovipositor? That's just a fancy word for some insects. They have a tube where they deposit eggs. So there's a little device, a little tube that a lot of insects use to deposit eggs into a plant or something like that. And basically, bees and wasps evolved from sawflies to have a very long, stiff ovipositor that is used to deposit eggs into plant stems. So it already had this really long ovipositor, and then over time it got modified into the stinger we see today. So and different stingers for bees and wasps, we'll talk about the differences later on. Well, why do these insects sting? Some for predation. So some of these wasps actually feed on insects, kind of like this, cicada killer, feeding on, they sting that cicada, they paralyze it. That way they can, and like mud daubers who will paralyze, spiders and things like that for food. they use that for food, and that's what they do, and some for defense. So if they're going to defend a hive, if they're in a hive, they're going to defend that hive. So they're using that stinger to deter animals like us or animals like dogs and things like that from disrupting their hive. They also, for defense, have a lot of bright colors. In nature, usually when something's brightly colored, it's either poisonous or possibly could sting, and that gives animals a warning that, hey, stay away from me. So they can sting, but they also have those bright colors to teach animals, or to tell animals, this is not, you don't want to approach me. For us, for people, we're concerned about, and your customers are concerned about stinging insects because of reactions. I'm at that minor reaction. Usually, when I get stung by a paper wasp or something like that, I typically have that minor, quick burning sensation. It's gone within a couple hours. That's a normal reaction. Other people, like my colleague here, Anna, you can actually get, moderate reactions. They swell, especially when you're stung on a sensitive place like the face here, and you start to swell up. And then there are certain population that actually can have anaphylaxis. So this could be life-threatening. So when we talk about controlling these insects, you have to, a lot of pest control operators, and I've been with lots of technicians who think, oh, safety equipment is not for me. I don't need a bee suit. Well, you can over time if you get stung enough, you can become more sensitive to stings and become allergic. And that is something to take seriously. So safety, when we get into control, is very important. We talk about sting and pain. I put this in here because it's cool. To me, it's cool. I embrace my nerdiness. But, when we talk about stuff, there's a person, Schmidt. This is the Schmidt Pain Index. And when he goes out and he just allows things to sting him, and he rates his pain level. So this is his pain level, and it's pretty cool that he's done this. I think he's a little nuttier than me, but he's done this, and he goes out and he does this, and there's this index. If you look it up, Schmidt Pain Index, it's a common thing. This is just one graphic. There's all kinds of graphics you see, but you see some common things like fire ants in here. You see maybe it's a little bit stronger pain here with the bald-faced hornet. Then you got the red paper wasp, a little bit stronger pain. Pain lasts for 5 to 10 minutes. So he times how long the pain lasts and the intensity. So cool little just fun thing to talk about stings. When we look at the morphology of a bee or wasp, they have two pairs of wings. That second pair is it's there, but it's the hind wings are there, but they're really reduced. So really, all you really see is those front wings there. They typically have chewing mouth parts. Some have lapping mouth parts like honeybees, for sucking up, plant nectar and things like that. But most of them have the chewing mouth parts, and we'll talk about, especially wasps, we'll talk about why later on. When you're identifying bees versus wasps, it really, right out of the gate, most people on this call understand when they see an insect that they think is a bee or wasp. When it's hairy, you call it a bee. When it's not hairy, you call it a wasp. But there's other ways to tell the difference, but that is a big one: hairy bodies versus smooth bodies for wasps. Honeybees, if you look at the eye, has this fuzzy eye, which we're going to show on the next slide. Really cool picture. And wasps have a notched eye. So bees don't have that notch in the eye like that picture shows there. So when you're looking at a wasp, that's one way. If it's a little confusing, if you look at the eye and you see the notch in the eye, that's a wasp. It's not a bee, but the hair usually gives it away. So the first thing we're going to talk about, the first insect we're going to talk about, and that's that beautiful hairy eye picture. If you've never seen that before for the honeybee, is the honeybee. Probably one of the most famous bees out there is the honeybee. Everybody talks about it. There's all kinds of label languages because of this particular insect to protect them, because they're a major pollinator, right? So that's why we want to protect them. They're a social insect, and they're one of the few true perennial insects. So that queen can actually live for up to 5 years. A lot of your bees and wasps are annual, so they die off in the wintertime. The queen may overwinter somewhere, not the honeybee. So this is, this colony can continue and continue. It doesn't die off and have to restart the next year in the spring. So they have a pretty cool social structure of young, pretty similar to ants. So the young are hanging out in the colony, in the hive, and they're feeding the larvae usually this jelly from their head capsule. They call it royal jelly. And that actually determines, we're going to talk about in the next slide, on what caste you become. So they're doing that. And then as they get older, so those are the young honeybees, as they get older, they start to be able to make the comb. So they're producing this wax from their abdomen, and that's the older honeybees are actually doing that. Then they get a little older than that. Their job changes again, and they're cooling the hive. And then the older workers actually start for defense. And then, and I always joke about this with ants, the oldest of the old, their job is to find food. So they're out constantly looking for food. That's what those old workers do. They're not defending the hive anymore. They're looking for food. They're out. So they have that kind of social behavior based on age throughout the colony, which is pretty cool for honeybees. And you have this one queen in the hive, and she stops the production of other queens for pheromones. So she's telling those young workers, right? Those young workers, don't make a queen because I'm still here. Now, once she's not able to produce that pheromone, then those workers can actually produce queens. And what they do is they feed them royal jelly only. So that larvae that's in there, they'll feed it just the royal jelly, and then that actually can become a queen. When you want to make workers, you feed them royal jelly and pollen. So you mix it. If they're those young workers are actually mixing the two, and those they become sterile queens. The males, there are males, they don't have stingers. They can't protect themselves, which is a bad thing, because in the end, when the colony doesn't need males and males are born, they just eat them. If you're a male and you're not needed, you're going to die pretty quickly. All those workers are going to consume you, and that's just the way of life in the honeybee colony. So cool biology, a little bit about their stinger. I've talked to you about the stinger. So honeybees have a barbed stinger. A lot of wasps have a really, there's no barbs on the stinger. They can sting you multiple times. The honeybee stings once. That barb goes in just like a fishing hook and doesn't come out. It rips out of the back of that honeybee. Then at the top, and you can kind of see it here in this picture. Those are those little venom sacs sitting on top of the stinger, and they're just pulsating, getting more and more venom into your body. It's one of the reasons why if you get stung by a honeybee, you gotta be careful about how you pull it out. You can actually make this thing worse by grabbing onto the venom sacs and squeezing all the venom out of it. So that's what they do. The queen does not have a barbed stinger. She doesn't have a barbed stinger. She uses it for oviposition, so she uses it for laying eggs. So, but the sterile females, they all have that barbed stingers, and they're stinging. Male, remember, does not have a stinger at all. So they're creating, remember that second stage of workers create that honeycomb with wax glands, and they're storing honey in that. And that's used for food for the winter time. They're not out foraging for food in the winter time. And this becomes a problem when we talk about control. As you can see in this picture, if you get a honeybee colony that decides to live in your home, there's a comb in there full of honey. And the number one rule about honeybee control is you can't just kill the honeybees. That's easy. Anybody on this call can kill honeybees. It's not a hard thing to do. Do you want to kill honeybees? Absolutely not. It's usually the last resort. But if you do have to kill honeybees, the hardest part about honeybee control is you have to remove the comb. That honey is kept in that wax combs by cooling it down. That the nest take, the other workers, the older workers are cooling that nest down. They're keeping it at the right temperature to keep that honey from melting all over the place and running all over the place, keeps it contained. And once they're gone, that will absolutely cause mold, any kind of, you name the wild animal, they're going to be attracted to that. Ants, there's all kinds of problems that happen once the honeybees are dead and you leave that comb there. So this is a problem with control, is that comb. One of the other things you see is as a colony gets older and it's been around for a while, what they can do is they can swarm. So all this is a new queen that leaves the colony, the original colony. She takes a bunch of workers with her, and she's going out to try to find a new place to start a new hive. And she's probably she's in the middle of all those worker honeybees. So all those worker honeybees, they're flying around looking for a new hive, and they stop and they rest on any kind of place, a wall, a car. You'll see these little swarms. They're non-aggressive. Why? Because there's no hive to protect. And what they're doing is they're resting, and they send out all the old. The elderly start to go out, and the elderly are looking not for food, but for a good place to start a new hive. So those elderly workers are out there looking for that new place to start a hive. And once they find it and come back and tell this swarm, hey, I found this, then they leave that area. But let's just say your customer is this one down here at the bottom, and they come out of their house and all of a sudden they see that on the side of their car. Typically they're going to panic a little bit, right? They're going to see that. They're going to, oh my gosh, I'm going to call my pest control company. And you get on the phone with them and they describe it, and you're like, oh, that's probably a honeybee swarm. Most likely, by the time you drive all the way to that customer's house because they're in a pure panic, those honeybees will move on. You could even call a beekeeper. We're going to talk about that next. But most of the time, beekeepers don't make it to these swarms because they'll find a new place to start a hive and they'll all move off. They're non-aggressive. I personally, if you could, especially on the side of a wall or a fence or a tree, I would let those honeybees find that hive and not doing a car. I can understand wanting to do something about them, but in the other situations, just let them find a place to nest. They'll move on. They're going to be non-aggressive. If you do contact a beekeeper, it's pretty easy. They'll go into that little swarm. They'll locate that queen. They put it into a box. All those swarmers will follow that queen into the box, and he or she is going to move on about their day. So that being said about a beekeeper, whatever state you're in, they all have bee associations. Like we have pest control associations. There's all these beekeeper associations out there in every single state. And as a pest control operator, your best friend when it comes to stinging insects, bees and wasps, is a beekeeper. The idea of killing honeybees is not a good look on the pest control industry. So If you don't have a friend or somebody that you can call that's a beekeeper, you can find one. I just Googled beekeepers in various states, and there's some states like North Carolina that goes down to the particular county, will give you a list of beekeepers in that county. And then you call around and you find somebody who is willing to work with you. And then when you have a bee call, you have somebody to, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, I see you've got a honeybee colony. I've got this beekeeper. They're going to come out. They're going to, here's much this cost to remove, because some of them will charge. And we'll talk about that in a second. But here's what we're going to do. We're going to remove that honeybee nest, and that is so much better looking on our industry. Get a beekeeper, call around. You can go on these websites. There's numbers on there, and some of them might not want to work with you, but they'll know somebody who does. Now, there's a difference with beekeepers. What I've learned in my experience in the industry, almost every one of these beekeepers will come out and remove a nest from something in nature, like a tree stump or a tree hole or something like that. Not all of them will come out and do anything with a hive that's in a house. So you have to find that special one, because again, there's construction involved in that. It's easy to remove them from something that they're nature, something in nature that they're nesting in. It's harder to do it when they're in the house. You gotta kind of call around to find a beekeeper that's willing to do that. And the problem with that is you got to know construction. Okay, so first, when you're dealing with nest in general in a wall void, bees, I don't care if it's wasp, whatever it is, a lot of people think, oh, well, I'm looking at the structure and they're going up there by the eave of the home. So that's where the nest is. And that might not be true. In this situation where you see this picture, the entry could have been by the eave and they're low on the wall. So the nest might not be anywhere near where they're going in. So you find the entry hole. It gives you a general idea where the nest is in that wall void. But the best way to do it, especially if you have brick siding like this, is you go inside and you can listen for the hive. You can actually go inside, based on the drywall, you can find, in general what area they're in, what wall void they're in, and you can find them. Now, when we talk about removing that honeycomb for honeybees, right? It is best to do that from the outside, like this person's doing there. You got to know construction if you're doing that. Why? Trying to open up a wall void with a bunch of honeybees in somebody's house, you can go into some bad situations, especially if you haven't killed all the honeybees in the nest, right? You're treating up top where the entry hole, where you think the nest is, and all of a sudden you go cutting drywall and 10,000 honeybees come out into somebody's home. That is not ideal situation. So I always try to treat them for the outside and remove them from the outside. If you have to treat them from the inside, you don't want to cut a big hole. You want to drill a hole where you can hear them at, drill a small hole, treat, and then you can actually take a piece of tape, and we'll talk about what to treat with here in a little bit. You can take a piece of tape over that hole so you don't get any escapees, and you wait till the honeybee sounds are no longer there. Then you can open up the wall and remove the nest. Killing honeybees is not that hard. Killing honeybees is not that hard. Dust, I'm a big dust fan. You can use like an Actisol machine, any of your aerosols will kill honeybees in that wall void. But again, if you can avoid that, you can get that honeybee keeper, that keeper to come out and take it out, find that person, they're gold, and then they're not killing the bees. It is not a good look to have a whole bunch of white honeybees falling all out when you cut the drywall out. I've done that with dust, and they're dead all over the place. It's just not a good look for us. So try to get them removed as much as possible. Try to find that beekeeper, call around, use your resources online. There's a lot of resources online for honeybee keepers. Go to the websites and find somebody that you can work with. The next bee we're going to talk about is bumblebees. And when I identify this, pretty robust, it's a big bee, right? It's very hairy. It's yellow and black, or sometimes yellow, black and orange bands. But it's got, right, the difference usually what people, is it a bumblebee or a carpenter bee? And we all know this. The bumblebee has the hair that goes all the way down its abdomen. So it's got hairy butt, right? That's how I teach technicians. They are a beneficial pollinator. The problem is that this particular bee, your beekeeper's not going to come out for. They'll come out for honeybees. They'll take the honeybee hive, but they typically won't come out for bumblebees. There's not a lot of commercial uses of bumblebee honey that I've seen. They usually, the people I've dealt with, they don't actually come out for the bumblebees. If you've never seen a bumblebee nest, typically we see them, they're foraging around plants, and the customer is a little concerned. And once you say they're pollinators, you can talk to customers. They're beneficial. They're not aggressive if there's no nest. But every once in a while, you run across a bumblebee nest, and they're not big. Because they're annual colonies, so they're going to be a couple hundred bumblebees in there. So they're not going to be like honeybees where the colony can grow and then spread over time. They're going to have to restart, every year. So that's an annual colony. But when you get, if you've ever had this experience, when you get close to a bumblebee nest, their defense mechanism is to make as much loud buzzing. You will think that there are thousands and thousands of bees in that nest when you get close. When they feel threatened, they will make a lot of noise. Then they're very aggressive. So this is not something you should be messing with, even honeybees too, without a bee suit. We saw this person doing the control here with that, wearing his proper safety equipment with honeybees. Same here with bumblebees. When they are aggressive pursuers, when you start messing with their nest, they will come out and they will chase you. They will, hunt you down. Very aggressive bees. Typically, they're not aggressive when they're around people's flowers and stuff like that, but when they're threatened, they sure can get aggressive. So you find their little nest, and they can be rodent burrows. There's one there. I see them a lot, usually in like large piles of grass clippings like this. You got this bumblebee nest. You have this grass clipping that was off to the side. Maybe somebody's got a compost pile. Any kind of void or something like that on the ground, they'll typically do that. If you have to kill a bumblebee nest, you want to, and it's interesting. I get this question all the time about labels. A lot of labels will say this, treat at dusk or early morning, mainly because it's a better treatment, because when you're treating bumblebees, if you treat them in the middle of the day, not every bumblebee is going to be in that nest. If you treat early morning or at dusk, late in the afternoon, then a lot of the colony is going to be right there in the nest. It's one treatment, it's over, it's done, and you can be done with it. If you middle of the day, maybe half the nest there, just a lot of things going on, a lot of foraging. Any bee treatment or wash treatment, I'm going to say this multiple times, the key is slow movements. Animals, things like that would be attacking their nests are going to move quickly. They're looking for fast moving objects and they're going to chase it. If you're slow, and even if you're wearing a bee suit, I still wouldn't run up to the nest and unless you like the thrill of them being all over you. Go slow. approach the nest entry slow, inject that entry with the product. It can be a dust, it can be, again, a liquid product. I would, watch where they're going in and out, treat the entry part first, then you uncover the nest and you can go ahead. I like a liquid in that situation, and you just treat the nest and you're killing all those bumblebees. Sad if you have to do it, but sometimes we have to do it. Now, not so sad, carpenter bees. Not my favorite bee in the world. Male versus female. Males have that little white spot on the front of their face. And why do you need to know that? My old professor, Dr. Kaler, used to go out and amaze people in the front of our lab, because we had a lot of carpenter bees drilling holes all over the lab. He never did anything about it. And a carpenter bee would be buzzing around. He would just grab it with his hand. Just like the honeybee, the male carpenter bee, and males in general, don't have stingers. So the male doesn't have a stinger. Now, that male carpenter bee will be pretty aggressive. His one job in life is protect the family, right? So he'll run right into you. He'll bump you. He'll go after you as a person. If he thinks you're threatening, that's his job, is protection. But he doesn't have a stinger. So I typically will, freak out a customer and just backhand one out of the air. It's kind of fun to do, whack, and they're like, oh my gosh. And you're like, yeah, that was a male. But you can tell if you look at it closely. Number one, he's dive bombing you. He's chasing you. That's pretty indicating of a male carpenter bee. And number two, he's got that white spot in the front of his face. So what we hate about them is they drill these holes into wood. They nest in wood. She's creating a shelter, an overwintering place for her babies to hatch. And she drills this hole in the wood. And if you've never seen this before, you've just seen the outside of the hole. This is what it looks like. This is a drawing of what it looks like inside. She puts a pollen in there, packs a cell with pollen, lays an egg in it. And then she puts a little wooden panel in between the two, so they're not interacting. They're protected. Each cell is protected. She creates those little cells, and then she's done, right? So she's gonna do all that work. She's drilling all the holes. She's getting all the pollen. His one job in life is protection. So he's flying around, fighting people, trying to protect. What do we do? This is the $1 million question. A lot of people on the call are going, okay, that's all nice about carpenter bees, but how do I kill them? So I wish I could tell you that, oh, here's the magic bullet. Here's the best product in the world. There's carpenter bee traps that work pretty well. But unfortunately, carpenter bees, when they like a particular area, if it's a conducive types of wood for them to put a nest, put those cells in to overwinter, they will return quite often. So one of the ways we tell customers, and it's not always 100%, is paint the wood or do some kind of varnish. And here's the theory behind that. That female carpenter bee, right? She's grabbing that wood with her mouth parts, with her chewing mouth parts, and she's ripping it out. That's how she has to do it. If you make it hard for her to grab the wood with paint or some kind of sealant or something like that, it deters her. Now, can she still do it? Yes, but it deters her. There's much easier places to do that. Now, a lot of people will paint their decks or varnish their decks, and that's great, but they don't do the underside of the deck. So what you see is everywhere there's not paint, they're going to come and drill little holes. So you got to do the whole deck, which some customers don't want to do. You can try to use an insecticide. I've seen all kinds of things being used. I would say it's timing. You got to get the right time when they're starting to be active, when you're starting to see carpenter bees out there active. That's when you want to sell those carpenter bee preventative kind of things. I've seen pest control operators doing that. You want to use something with a quick knockdown agent in there. You can make your favorite insecticide do that with a product like Exciter, or you can use a product like Onslaught Fast Cap. That's an MGK product that already has that in it. It's already got the Exciter in there. And the reason why I like products like that is you don't want that carpenter bee to get into the wood, so you want something that's going to act very quickly to knock that carpenter bee down. Now, that being said, when you treat a carpenter bee nest, when you've already got a nest, be careful. A lot of times I see technicians make this mistake. You spray an aerosol product into that opening, that hole, and the female's in there. She's pretty robust. She doesn't always immediately come out of that hole and die. I could kill a male with my hand. I'll knock him down and step on him. The female in the hole, though, is pretty, she's in there. You spray it with an aerosol can, and then maybe a minute later, she comes out, falls on the ground, flutters for a little bit, she dies. The problem I've seen with technicians is they start to try to plug that hole way too early. Oh, there's no carpenter bee in there. I'm gonna go ahead and fill the hole with some putty or something like that. You got to give them time, because some of them take a little time. So just be aware. Go ahead and treat however many holes you got, do them all, then come back and plug holes. And when I usually treat holes, I'll take a screwdriver or some kind of ice pick or something and try to get it in there to break those cells up, in there. So that's something I do before I seal the hole. These are also, so carpenter bees are a big issue. This is something that happens to all of us. You have these solitary bees, and they're actually pollinators. So you got mason bees, there's a whole bunch of different bees that will nest in the ground and do these little mounds that you see in this picture. And there's a whole bunch of wasps that do that. But wasps typically don't feed. Wasps are feeding on more proteins. They're feeding on more insects, things like that, spiders, things like that. So there's solitary bees and solitary wasps that do this exact same thing. And you get those calls. I've got all these little holes in my front yard, and these bees and wasps are coming out of them. What do I do? Well, again, kind of like the carpenter bee thing, here's what I've found. Chemically, you can try to deter them. There's a lot of products that will irritate them. They don't really want to be there. But when you think about where you see those solitary bees and wasps, it's usually on the side of a hill. It's usually, they don't like if you have a fresh, yard, you have a yard that has really nice grass that's completely filled in, beautiful yard, like the picture here, you're not going to see those solitary bees. They're in areas where there's patchy grass, where there's dirt, and that's what they're looking for. And they're in areas that are very well drained. They don't like muddy soil. Having muddy soil means if they're starting to dig into that soil, it's just going to be full of water. So they try to avoid mud and muddy soil, wet soil. So it's usually, that's why it's on the side of a hill, because it's drained and the water doesn't accumulate and mud up after rain. So that's why they like to do that. So I've done this before. Water is actually an amazing deterrent for solitary bees and wasps. You turn the sprinkler on them and they will all leave that area. They don't want to be in that area. They're not going to want to be in that area because that soil's all wet. But how do you tell a customer, hey, I am not going to treat it. You need to do something. You need to put the sprinkler out. Well, what am I paying for pest control for? I've heard that from customers. I was a branch manager in part of my career. So I've done this. Use a little granular product. I don't care what granular it is. Then you tell your customer, hey, this granular needs to be watered in. And you need to water it, like every other day unless it's going to rain. I want you to do that for a couple weeks, and you'll see that these bees are these minor bees or wasps. These wasps will leave, and you'll get rid of them that way. So that's my little trick that I've worked, it works most of the time. Little granular product out there to deter them in the area. And then I treat the whole side of that hill with the granular product and tell them, I really need you to turn on the sprinklers here. If the grass starts growing on that hill a little bit better, all the better. The water itself will actually deter them. So just, long term, if they're not going to grow grass there, some kind of weed barrier will stop this in the future, or resodding the area will actually stop this long term in the future. Okay, now we're going to talk about wasps. So we're done with bees. Now we're going to get into wasps. So basically, the circle of life for wasps are the queens. This time of year, queens in a wasp nest, if they're producing queens, they're going to overwinter. They're going to mate and overwinter somewhere. You might be in a person's attic this time of the year when it's in the fall. You might get calls. I got these wasps in my house. I would go check the attic because they like to overwinter in attics and stuff like that. And maybe there's an access that some of the workers are coming. They'll all go, and then the queen survives in that protected area. So then she emerges. She builds a nest. She lays eggs. She's looking for food. She's looking for wood because she has to construct that nest. And then after a while, she doesn't do anything but become a big egg laying machines, and the workers kind of like, again, they all have their job. They're creating more combs for her to lay eggs in, that you're expanding the nest, and then the whole cycle starts over again in the winter. Two types of wasps we're going to talk about: paper wasp and yellow jackets. Paper wasps, there's a visual cues. If I see a paper wasp, that typically they're slender looking. They're not, yellow jackets are, hefty. Like they're the big muscle bound, wasp out there. They're the hefty guys out there. And they're usually this kind of, the paper wasps be colorful, but they got these little cool designs on them. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. But the big reason why you can tell paper wasps from yellow jackets typically is the nest, right? The paper wasp has this open comb like this, is this open nest. It's not sealed. You can see the eggs, you can see the larvae, everything. You can see it right there. It's all out in the open. That's a paper wasp nest. They can be all different kinds of colors. This is a bunch of different colors here in North Carolina. That's where I'm at. We have that red one's a really common one, but this is the paper wasp nest, and they're on that. They have that little stalk that attaches it to a surface, and it's usually in a protected area because they don't want to be out in the rain. They're not going to be in the middle of a yard somewhere making a nest. They're usually covered area. That's where they want to be, and that's typically where they're going to go. And they're protein, so they're looking for insects. They're looking for they'll forage in trash cans looking for proteins and things like that. That's what they're looking for. Easy to treat, right? The nest is right there. You see the paper wasp nest. It's usually not that big. Time of day, that just jumped. There we go. Time of day is normally not that important. And we use a lot of aerosols in this situation. And this is something I'm going to talk about further with their new Onslaught Power Shot, MGK's product. But when you use the aerosol, the big issue with aerosols is sometimes you can get some staining. So I don't know if you can see it real good. I'm going to show my pin down here. That is all. So you had some paper wasp nests underneath these little vents, and somebody went in and treated, and lo and behold, now you got these little stains. So we're going to talk about Onslaught Power Shot mainly because it's just another wasp product, but it's a water-based product. So that's what I wanted to talk to you about it. So the big issue with treating paper wasp nests, and I've seen technicians do this, you don't stand directly under the nest, right? And I talked about safety and wearing a bee suit. If you know you have allergic reactions to bees, you need to, even with paper wasp nests, be wearing protection gear, right? Always want to be safe. But most of us, we just go out, we treat the paper wasp nest. The biggest issue you have safety-wise is don't stand directly underneath the nest. paper wasps, even though they're dying and they're falling down, if you're standing right underneath the nest while you're treating it, right, they will fall on you. And I've seen technicians do this. Go down your shirt, you're gonna get stung. Okay, they can still sting as they're dying. I have seen it happen. Technicians, they're falling down like rain, and he's standing right underneath the nest, and boom, gets sting. And I'm like, well, you won't do that again. I think that's self-correcting. You learn not to stand directly underneath it, but that's the big issue with paper wasps is where you are. Yellow jackets and hornets. So a lot of people, just a little known fact, I don't know what the reasoning we call it the ball-faced hornet, but a ball-faced hornet is actually a yellow jacket. It's a yellow jacket. It has a hornet name, but there is a European hornet. Is the one really common hornet here. It's the one that I know the most in the U.S. There's other hornets, but they're not as common as you think. The ball-faced hornet is actually yellow jacket. So yellow jackets are more of a problem. This is something, again, bee suit. I know I'm preaching to the choir here because they're very aggressive, right? So they can either nest in voids. I've seen that. They can above ground, yellow jackets below ground. I'm gonna show you pictures of those. And they're scavengers. They'll scavenge in trash cans. They're looking for all kinds of proteins, insects, things like that. When entomologists identify, when you send a picture of a yellow jacket to me and go, hey, what is this? We're all looking at this. We're all looking at the design on their abdomen. So a lot of these yellow jackets, you can see the species, and I'm going to quickly go through the species here, but there's a bunch of different species of yellow jackets. You can see the difference in the species based on their designs on the abdomen. So this is a below ground nest. It's got those combs, so just kind of like that paper wasp nest, got those combs still, but it's enclosed in the ground in this wood. It's covered like that, and this is what it looks like. You got an entry point, and then there's an entry to the nest somewhere, and that's good to know when we get into control. This is a typical. When I see that kind of nest, I immediately know it's a ball-faced hornet, which is a yellow jacket. It's above ground nest here. It's got that pretty design. There's an entry hole there, and that's that above ground nest. So it's all covered, though, unlike the paper wasp nest. When you're dealing with yellow jackets, and I'm going to skip through these. This is just different species. You got the eastern yellow jacket. You've got the German yellow jacket, which is actually throughout most of the northern part, and they've actually taken away from some of the eastern yellow jackets. You got there's lots of different southern yellow jackets, just different species of yellow jackets. And the ball-faced hornet is a yellow jacket. When you're treating yellow jackets, I think it's very important, again, to treat early morning. Sometimes you can't in dusk. Why? Because it's when the most of the water. Doesn't mean you can't. If you read a label and it says, hey, treat early, that's a suggestion. It doesn't mean you can't treat it other times. It's a suggestion. It's a best practice. It comes on a lot of labels. You'll see that say bees or wasps. You want to wear your protective gear because, and you need the right kind of suit, right? You need the right kind of suit. Because yellow jackets, if you get into them and they start attacking, they're aggressive stingers. And unlike honeybees, they're sting multiple times. So, you get 100 yellow jackets on you, they're all stinging 2 or 3 times. You can, whether you're allergic or not, you could be in the hospital. So it's a safety issue. When you're looking at the entrance, you're looking for entry points like that. Basically, I watch them. If they're nesting in a void like this, we talked about this with honeybees too. They might not be right there, right? They could be lower down in the wall. So you need to locate them, and treat accordingly in that situation. If they're in a wall void, if they're nesting in a wall void, you're drilling a hole so they don't come out. It's not, sometimes operators like to remove the nest. It's not as important to remove the nest here as it is for honeybees. But if you're drilling a hole, if they're in a wall void, we'll drill a small hole, treat that sucker because you can hear them in the wall void. Treat it, no more sound. Go out, you can dust that entry point or something like that. Put some tape over that, then they can repair the hole later on. That's how I treat yellow jackets in a void. If they're aerial nests, this is where aerosols come into play. These extension poles are amazing. You need something like that because if you have to get on a ladder, number one, and I'm going to talk about, I'll skip this in my presentation about onslaught power shot, but if you have to get on a ladder, this is where an aerosol can comes into handy. Trying to climb a ladder where you have to have 3 points of contact, that's ladder safety, right? With a B&G in your hand is not as easy as a duster, small duster, or an aerosol can. I like aerosol cans if I've got to get on a ladder. So I usually remove the nest if it's an above ground nest. If it's in a void, it's up to you. If it's in the ground, it's up to you. A lot of people do. Typically in those situations, I would use a product with a residual. A lot of products don't have good residual. If you're going to knock them down when something doesn't have a residual, that's fine. But then go back in and treat with an Actisol machine or a dust with some kind of residual for any returning yellow jackets. That's why you would want to remove a nest in the first place. If you don't want to remove the nest, definitely want to use a residual in these situations. When you're treating a ground nest, again, careful, slow. Go up, don't run up to the ground nest entry point and stick your face in it. I don't care if you're wearing a bee suit. I go slow. I watch the flight pattern. You don't want to be standing in a flight pattern when you're treating a ground nest, right? So if their flight pattern, if the yellow jackets are coming in this way, I'm going to treat this nest from over here, and they're not going to run right into me and sting me. So you want to approach from the side, opposite direction that they're entering the nest. You can dust that hole. You can treat inside aerosol. You can use a power rig. I've seen guys do that before. But that's the entry hole right there. Be aware and watch, because I've seen it before. Sometimes they can have two holes. I've had that happen. So this is why I like to watch them before I run up there and just kill them. You need to take your time. So sometimes there can be multiple entry holes, so be careful. Safety is important. Don't rush. And don't be that person. And I'll be completely honest with you, even with bald-faced hornets. I have been this person we're about to show. Didn't get stung, but with absolutely no protection. It is not the ideal situation. You need protection. So we've all seen videos like this. This is one of my favorites where a customer thinks they're gonna, oh, I can do this. I don't need pest control company come out here. And not worried any. That's a yellow jacket. That's a yellow jacket above ground nest right there. He grabbed it in the bag, and now he's regretting his decision. So I just think that's hilarious. But that could be you. You get into a situation where you're not protected. That can be you. So protect yourself. Don't panic. Slow, steady movements, and you'll have a lot less issues with these stinging insects. So onslaught power shot, with the 7 minutes I've got left, real quickly, talked about the use of aerosols. One of the reasons why you see a lot of oil-based aerosols, okay? There are a lot of oil-based aerosols out there. In fact, I think there's one other water-based. It's an all-natural water-based aerosol for wasp and hornets. But the oil-based is common because oil products actually have a narrow stream. It's pretty easy to get an aerosol can with a narrow, and it goes really good distance. Easy to do that with aerosol, with a oil-based aerosol. Water-based aerosols actually typically have just the opposite. Short distance, wide spray, right? So that's a problem, and one of the reasons why you see Onslaught Power Shot be one of the few water-based aerosols now going to be coming out in the market in spring. You can get this from Veseris, but this is a water-based aerosol because we did a lot of research on the cap of this aerosol. So the cap in this aerosol makes it, takes that wide pattern. It's a really small nozzle at the top of the cap. Took a lot of effort, a lot of trial and error to find the right cap to get good distance, and that's what makes it go. And we talk about speed. The other difference between oil-based and water-based is you will, I'll just be completely honest, notice the difference in speed. So oil actually soaks into the cuticle much quicker cuticle penetration, faster active ingredient. You can have the exact same active ingredient, oil versus water. The oil is going to work a little faster than the water, but it's not that much different. So this is a quick little video to show you. On the left is a very common, probably the most common oil-based aerosol wasp product, and on the right is Onslaught Power Shot. Now, what you notice there is total different behavior from these paper wasps. Water, if you sprayed that paper wasp nest with water, they're going to do that. They immediately don't sense the danger. They go to the back of the comb because they think it's water, and now they're reacting to the chemical. Now they're starting to fall. So the oil base is pretty much done. About 10 seconds later, you start seeing the water base start to fall. So I don't want you to think like, oh, they're going to be the exact same thing. The water base is going to be a little bit slower. You're looking at losing about 10 seconds. They're going to fall. They're going to die, just like the oil base. But they don't know it's a threat. So typically they'll just go to the back of that comb, come back, and start to fall off when you see that. But why oil base versus water base? This is why we actually got into this. We created this product in the first place because there's a need. If you've never done this before, knock on wood, congratulations with an oil-based product. You know, a lot of us have done this where there's a wasp nest underneath that shutter there. Somebody treated underneath that shutter. The oil-based product runs down. What you should do immediately is remove that oil-based product for any running, but technicians don't. They forget about it. I once replaced it as a technical person, saw our company had to replace a composite deck because the technician treated and left the product on the composite deck, and it did this kind of thing. So that happens in our industry. So with the water-based product, it's, the likelihood of staining is really low. Why? Because it's water, right? So you might get a cleaning effect. Sometimes you can see that where if it's dirty and you get a little cleaning from the water-based product, but it's not going to leave this oily residue on that. So this actually has more than just wasp on the label. It's got other insects like spider. This is Onslaught. So it's like Onslaught Power Shot, Onslaught Fast Cap. It's got that S-phenvalerate in it, so it gets that residual. So because of the nozzle tip, we can use a straw in this one. We have a really small nozzle coming out of this water-based product to get that distance, and we can use a straw in there so you can get it in cracks and crevices and control spiders. It can be used with more, and it's water-based, so it can be used for more than just wasp and hornets. So you're in a spider situation, you can actually treat with Onslaught Power Shot with that straw. So if there's any questions, I know I didn't leave a whole lot of time. I got 2 minutes for questions, but if there's any burning questions out there, I got time for a few questions.
Hey, Tommy, thank you for presenting such great informative information. It definitely kept my attention. So let me go ahead and check our questions pane. And I do see we do have a couple that came in. This person is asking, how much time does it take for an aerosol product to completely empty?
Oh, that's a good question. So difference, water-based versus oil. So and we tested this, oil-based products, about 6 seconds. If you take the nozzle, push it down, and keep on going, 6 seconds later, you're going to empty that can, depending on the size of the can. The normal cans, if you get a larger can, you might get a little bit longer, but 6 seconds. Our product, water-based product, remember, it's not as not as much pressure because it's water, about 12 seconds. So you got about 12 seconds worth of product coming out of there. Great question.
Very good. This next question's asking is how far with onslaught power shot, how far will it reach when treating a wasp nest?
So that I used to think I knew all about that until we got into this, right? So we got into this product and I learned something. It is based on the person treating. So you go to the over-the-counter stores and you see, we'll reach up to 30 feet. Well, if you get a basketball player with an outreached arm, really tall basketball from the ground, 30 feet in the air, easy to do, right? So actually all those products do that. When you see that how distance, it's based on the outreached arm from the ground of the person treating. So you get a shorter person, not going to go as far, right? But you could typically get 15, 20 feet from an aerosol. When you start seeing the 25, 30 feet, they're playing around with the height of the person. That's a little trick I learned. I didn't know anything about till I got it, so we started doing this project. And I was like, how do they say 30 feet on a can? And yeah, it's based on height off the ground.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
You've gotten
Two-story building.
Yeah, you've gotten a few kudos here, so just want to let you know people are really enjoying the presentation you gave. It is the top of
Thank
the
you.
hour, but we do have time for one more question. And this person's asking, how would I use Onslaught Power Shot to treat pests like spiders in a crack or crevice?
So that's what I love about the can and the little if you ever use an aerosol can where you got the nozzle and the straw fits in there, without straw and with straw, not one that's attached, but one that has a straw in there. Same concept here. So you can actually slide that straw into Onslaught Power Shot. If you got spiders behind or something behind an eave or a siding or something like that, you can shoot it up in there. You're going to get that quick action, and you're going to get that, again, the residual of Onslaught. It's in the Onslaught family, so it has that Espen valerate in it. So
Okay.
great product for not just bees and wasps, but for other things.
Okay, I'm going to squeeze in a couple more questions here for you, Tommy. So you said the product's coming in spring of 2025, I believe.
Yep.
What about California? Is that going to be?
I think we got approved in California. That was the one holdup. I'm pretty sure we got all states now. California, of course. It's California or New York.
Yeah.
California and New York, they're always the problem children. But I think we've got approval in California. When we first started talking about that, we didn't. I believe we got California back, or we feel like we're going to get California back by spring of 2025.
Okay, perfect. Here's a question asking, at what external temperature would the product freeze in the can?
That's a good question. I don't know about freezing as much. I would say it's never good idea to leave out product even in a aerosol can or a liquid product, a concentrate, out when it's below freezing temperatures. You want to at least keep them in a cab, in some kind of thing. It's going to be the same. I know it's oil versus water, but it's not going to be a big difference between heating and freezing oil versus water. So anything that your normal aerosol cans, I mean, our corporate office is in Minneapolis, Minnesota. It gets negative at 28 degrees there. In that temperature, I wouldn't leave any aerosol can outside. It doesn't matter if it's oil or water based.
Yeah,
That's a good question.
advice.
I gotta get the answer to that. I don't know
Yeah.
the exact answer to that. When will it freeze?
Here's another one asking, does this product treat bed bugs?
No, does not have bed bugs on the label. It is not a bed bug product.
Gotcha. All right, it looks like we have addressed all the questions that have come in through the questions pane. So I want to thank you, Tommy, and everyone for attending today's webinar. Like I mentioned earlier, you will receive a follow-up email this afternoon that contains a short survey and the recording of today's session. So please share your feedback And on behalf of Tommy and Veseris, thank you for joining us today. Everyone have a great rest of your day and a wonderful, safe Thanksgiving next week.
Absolutely. Don't eat too
Yep.
much turkey. I will.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, guys.